Hey, welcome back, everyone. Well, we're on the eve of the impeachment trials of former President Donald Trump, and the Senate is now going to begin its, process to attempt to impeach him. Senate Democrats, to be exact. Now, as we go into this, I've mentioned they don't have the votes for it, probably. And not only that, but the narrative is falling apart right now. A lot of stuff we've talked about before, but it's coming to the forefront. You, of course, have the whole constitutional argument. Is it constitutional to impeach a former president, not a sitting president? There's no precedent for it. Technically, no. At the same time, there's new evidence coming out on the actual Capitol breach itself, which is basically the whole thing's falling apart. let's put it that way. Good seeing you all here as always. I'll be going into all this in just a bit. Yeah, good seeing y'all. Paul Baker, hey, how you doing? Jenny Worcester, good to see you. Thank you. Thanks everyone for being here. So I'm going to go into a few different stories tonight. We're going to talk about the impeachment, where that's at. I'll also talk about the agreement that was reached between Democrats and Republicans on this. I also want to go into a bit of what's coming out now on the Department of Justice. Peter Navarro, one of Trump's former top advisors, is now alleging that Barr may have been slow-walking Trump's policies, that Barr may have been working against Trump, essentially, during Trump's last days in office, and that the Department of Justice seems to have had a double standard when it came to dealing with executive orders. With Trump slow-walked, with Biden, it's pushing him through one after another, rapid pace. All right, folks, let's jump into some stories. Then we'll go into some questions. And as always, if you have questions, leave them in the chat, and I'll try to get to them. Yeah, and good seeing you all again. Thank you. All right, folks, first story for the night is Epoch Times. As evidence mounts that Capitol breach was pre-planned, eroding into incitement allegation in Trump impeachment trial. We'll go over this a bit, then I'll explain it a bit more. Now, it says, as former President Donald Trump's Tuesday impeachment trial, that's tomorrow, by the way, approaches, there is a growing body of evidence in criminal complaints and affidavits that the January 6 Capitol breach had been pre-planned, undercutting the allegation leveled against Trump that he is guilty of incitement to insurrection. A number of FBI affidavits filed in support of various charges, including conspiracy against accused participants in the Capitol breach, show evidence of pre-planning, reinforcing an argument made by critics of the impeachment trial against Trump, namely that participants couldn't have been incited by the president to break into the building if they had earlier planned to do so. What does this mean? It means that, ironically, because we're going to talk about it, the Department of Justice fast-tracking Biden's executive orders and fast-tracking Biden's policies, while the Department of Justice under Trump really was slow-balling a lot of things, right? They were moving things out as slow as they could, seemingly. That may have worked against them in their attempts to impeach Trump. Had they waited a little bit, had they said Trump incited them, that's one thing. But now it's coming out that, Department of Justice rushed through to press charges against people, rushed through with conspiracy charges, meaning there was pre-planning and planning amongst individuals, and also surface narrative itself, the fact that people were breaching the Capitol building while Trump was still talking. Again, he was speaking in front of the Washington Monument, and this was the Capitol building. He couldn't have possibly gotten there on time. Wouldn't possibly work. And so all these combine to say that it's pretty much the claims don't line up. The claims are not supported by evidence. I'll go into this a bit more, right? But basically, here's the reality, right? You have 50 Democrats, 50 Republicans in the Senate. House already voted to impeach Trump. That means it goes to the Senate for trial. Remember, they had tried to impeach Trump before, passed in the House, failed in the Senate because the Republicans control the Senate. They need a 2/3 majority vote in the Senate to actually pass this. And the Senate is essentially acting like judge, jury, and executioner on this. Now, the Democrats, very likely, regardless of evidence, regardless of what Trump says, regardless of what is brought forward, they're probably not going to switch their votes. giving them credit, maybe one or two might switch their votes, but it's not seeming that way. Seems like, they typically march in lockstep, regardless of what is brought forward. It's possible some Republicans who just don't like Trump are going to vote against him as well. Although it's hard to say because some of the House Republicans who voted against Trump are now getting censured in their local states for voting to impeach. And so even the 5 people who voted saying that they think it's okay to impeach a private citizen, not a former president, that was the vote brought forward by Senator Rand Paul. You might remember. On that vote, 5 people voted in, 5 Republicans voted in favor of still, saying that it's constitutional to vote like this, suggesting again that only 5 Republicans are very likely going to vote alongside the Democrats. Now, again, the important thing to mention here is that the presentation of evidence is going to have limited effect. Very likely, none of the Democrats are going to change their votes. Very likely, the evidence brought forward will have no weight beyond just these next couple days where they're going to try to impeach him. The most that the Democrats could hope for is that they win over a few Republicans to their side. But given that they need 2/3 majority, that's quite a few to win over. And it's not, honestly, it's the chances of that happening are very slim. Really, the main thing this is doing, this really is public spectacle, right? This is public spectacle for the most part, and possibly strategic because they're setting precedent for future votes, right? Government often works like that. But the public spectacle is going to be the interesting part, and Trump is already showing a trait that he is very good at that maybe a lot of us forgot that he has, which is Trump is great at changing the trajectory of things. He's great at this, political judo, I guess you could call it, where people start narratives against him, and he tends to take hold of the narrative and redirect the narrative. He's very good at this, actually. And we can see him doing this now, where what he's doing is through his arguments, he's going to be presenting videos and evidence showing that the Democrats themselves had encouraged people to act in violence. The Democrats themselves had encouraged people to hold violent protests. The Democrats encouraged people to even go out and publicly shame and humiliate Republicans, and that this did lead to violence. And you already have them on the defense. For example, Senator Maxine Waters is already defending herself because one of the videos Trump has brought up was her giving her speech saying, if you can't remember the exact words, if you see them on the street, you get a crowd together and you tell them they're not welcome here, something like that, right? Maxine Waters. She's already trying to refute this, meaning that already Trump has them working on the defense. Already it's going in that direction. Now, folks, I mentioned before that Crossroads is, just real quick, Crossroads is demonetized totally right now by YouTube, which some of you are asking why you can't, there's no super chat. We're demonetized. We can contest this, but we'll have to see whether it actually happens. But we do have some good news. We have gotten a sponsor for the show, which actually helps us quite a bit. It's American Hartford Gold, and really something that I can genuinely recommend to you all. Now, just real quick on this. Again, tonight's sponsor is American Hartford Gold. And with all the craziness with the economy, now I've mentioned before, inflation, how that works is basically a hidden tax, how government spends money, there's debt, so on, leads to inflation. Basically, this whittles away your savings, right? Inflation, doubles once every 10 years, something like that. Meaning that if you have 50K in the bank, in 10 years, it's going to be 50K still, but the equivalent worth of 25K. And if government is spending like crazy, like they are right now, you're going to see inflation go up. In addition to this, we see the economy really having mixed projections on how it's going, especially with this trade war with the Chinese Communist Party still ongoing and likely going to get stronger. And we also see issues as well with the stock market not necessarily being stable. But there's something that typically is stable, which is gold and silver. And I know a lot of you were asking, what could you invest in that's actually stable? Where could you put your money that's actually stable? Gold and silver. So American Hartford Gold is one of the highest rated firms in the country with an A+ rating from the Better Business Bureau. They're legit, right? I wouldn't tell you guys otherwise. They can have your gold and silver delivered right to your doorstep, right into your IRA if you have an IRA. Now, to learn more about them, please check out the link in the comments below where American Hartford Gold is providing a free 25-page information guide. Anyone looking into investing in gold, check out that guide. It's in the description below. And also, they've given us an offer for all of you as well. If you call them now, they can get up to $1,500 of free silver on all qualifying first orders. The phone number for that is 877-260-2764. And that's again 260-2764. Or you can text Joshua to 65532. And again, folks, that's 877-260-2764, or text Joshua to 65532. And again, folks, these guys are really helping us, especially to this time when we're demonetized. And again, I can genuinely recommend them. Again, one of the more stable currencies is gold and silver, and you can invest in gold and silver. So anyone looking for a safe investment, that is my personal recommendation, one that's going to be pretty sturdy regardless of how the economy shakes up. Even if it fluctuates, it tends to restabilize, and actually it's been on the incline for quite some time now. All right, that said, let me go into just one more story, and then I'll go into some of the questions for the night. Real quick on this, and real quick on the impeachment, right? It says here, there's another story. Trump is pleased with bipartisan deal on impeachment trial structure. It says, former President Donald Trump and his legal team are pleased with the agreement reached between Senate Republicans and Democrats on the framework for the upcoming impeachment trial, Trump's office said in a statement. Now, briefly on this, just a bit of background, right? Briefly on this, Republicans and Democrats in the Senate had to come to an agreement on the structure of the trial. They came to an agreement, and honestly, when this first came out, it's hard to say where the Republicans are with Trump right now. But Trump seems pleased with it. Basically, they did agree on a structure for this, which will let Trump actually bring his arguments, right? The arguments of actually showing these videos like he's going to do of Democrats inciting violence in riots. Now, the statement says this, quote, from the Trump team. We appreciate that Senate Republican leadership stood strong for due process and secured a structure that is consistent with past precedents. This process will provide us with an opportunity to explain to senators why it is absurd and unconstitutional to hold an impeachment trial against a private citizen. Now, this comes after Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, announced that the upper chamber had reached a bipartisan deal on how the impeachment trial would be run a day before the proceedings are scheduled to begin. And Schumer said this in a statement, quote, all parties have agreed to a structure that will ensure a fair and honest Senate impeachment trial of the former president. Now, I won't go into this too much, but basically the trial will begin with a 4-hour debate on whether the proceedings should be dismissed. So there's actually going to be a 4-hour debate on whether the whole thing should be dismissed, and that's how it's going to start. And again, Trump's first focus is going to be arguing the whole thing is unconstitutional and calling into question the entire way this whole thing was formed in the first place. After that, he's going to be going into basically video evidence of Democrats inciting violence, inciting riots, encouraging violence, and so on. Basically showing that not only did Trump not do what they claim he did, which the evidence is now showing, he was still giving a speech when people were breaching the Capitol building, and the quotes they've used to try to make these claims on him are taken out of context, as we've gone over in previous episodes. With this, really, the whole thing is going to be quite the show. And again, folks, I'll be covering that tomorrow as it happens. Tomorrow night for the Q&A. Yeah, Marlu Pilar, thank you. He said, I love how you and Roman do your commercials. Awesome. Yeah, Roman is the main, Roman Belmakov. He also does a show called Facts Matter with Epoch Times. If you've seen the Epoch Times commercials, you've seen Roman. He and I worked together on some. Roman's the real artist behind those. I just kind of chime in my analysis sometimes. He's very creative, and the company lets him, act on his creativity as long as, of course, it's within our values. Roman's quite the character. Yeah. All right, folks, I'm going to do a few questions. This is from the one and only Pinky Pinky. You say the CDC reports over 500 deaths from the vaccines. When you get a chance, even if it's not today, please talk about that. Yeah, actually, I wanted to go a bit into that as well. Facebook, for example, is now deleting posts that report on vaccines in ways they don't like. Now, I'll be explaining that in just a bit. I don't know how many of you, well, I'm sure a lot of you are aware, there's actually a vaccine court that handles these cases. And so basically when big pharma, these big corporations that really are in charge of our medicines and pricing on medicines, there's a big complicated business behind it that Trump actually did hit on. I think I've done a whole episode on this back in the day when I was doing more of the in-studio newscasts. I won't go too deep into it because it gets pretty complicated. But basically, there's big pharma. There's a government branch that works to regulate prices on medicine. Trump was fighting against them quite a bit, although in the end he wasn't able to get rid of them. It was quite complicated. But you have this kind of public-private business between pharma and big government, which regulates prices, which establishes prices. And through this organization, pseudo government, they even get directly involved in the markets, for example, running some of the pharmacies. It's quite the double standard and quite the conflict of interest, actually. Now, the issue you have with vaccines, and take it for what it's worth, I'm not going to get into arguments on how effective you think vaccines are. Like right and left, people can't agree on that one. But here's the big issue. There are complications with vaccines, and the issue is that if you sue the companies, there's a separate court through the government that works on this, and the amount of money you can get back through those lawsuits, even if it's death, someone dies, is actually pretty menial, the amount you can get on it. And in addition to this, it's subsidized by taxpayers. The companies don't have to pay for it. The government pays for it, meaning that when these companies get sued for bunk vaccines, you and I are the ones who have to pay for it out of our own tax dollars. Yeah, how's that for a system? How's that for accountability, right? And yeah, now you have it so you can't even question this on Facebook, or they're threatening to pull your post down and such. Yeah, here we are, right? Now this is another question from Sam Ernest. He said, Trump is no longer president. How can he legally be impeached then? Well, that is going to be the main argument from the Trump legal team, because according to the Constitution, technically that doesn't happen. Democrats are arguing their argument suggesting that they can impeach a former president, that they can impeach a private citizen, right? The basis of that whole argument is them saying we don't believe that the framers of the Constitution would have allowed some a president to do wrongdoing right before leaving office and then get off scot-free. That's their argument. In other words, their argument is not something that's written down. Their argument is a personal opinion assessment, not based on written law, not based on right? It's not written law, not based on written law, not based on actual precedent, not based on anything other than personal opinion and interpretation. And does personal opinion and interpretation hold up in the court of law? Right? No. Again, this is why we are a constitutional republic, or a system of federalism, rather than a democracy. And this is the difference with that. A democracy is mob rule. A democracy is whatever the mob says is the right thing to do becomes the right thing to do, right? It's where anyone votes and anything can be done. A constitutional republic, which is what we are, not a democracy, is where you have checks and balances in place that are beyond the realm of the mob. In other words, we have a constitution, we have standards, we have written laws, and these cannot be overridden by the mob. If there's enough votes going against it, they can't just change it. What they're trying to do is mob rule, basically. They're trying to create laws that don't currently exist. And they're using their interpretation of these laws they've created to try to go after the former president of the United States while he was president, meaning that nobody's safe from this alteration of laws on the go. And again, as well, the lack of constitutional foundation for this is why Chief Justice Roberts is not overseeing it. Because the Constitution says that the Chief Justice is supposed to oversee impeachment hearings of a president, and Trump's not president right now. And so based on that, he can't oversee it, meaning that this isn't even being done under the Supreme Court. This is purely being done under the Senate by individuals who have demonstrated bias against Trump over the past 4 years, right? Now, if this was a judge, right? If this was a judge or this was a jury, and I don't know how many of you have done jury duty before, but basically, if you do jury duty, you go and sit in the courtroom, and the judge will ask you questions. Do you believe, for example, that if a person chooses to remain silent, that they should be able to remain silent and not be incriminated? And if you say no, why would they remain silent if they're innocent, right? Why not say stuff? Then the judge says, okay, you're out. Because if you don't show a recognition, the ability to recognize the laws, it means that you're not going to base your assessment on the laws. You need to base your assessment of guilty or not guilty on the laws. And even if the character of the person makes you feel that they are guilty, that is not a basis of law, meaning that you would be excused from the court for being like that, meaning that the entire basis of this is like that, of this impeachment trial. On top of that, if you have demonstrated bias, in other words, if you have, racial views or personal views, or even to the extent in a court of law that you've read news articles that would change your interpretation of an issue or pre-establish your conclusion about a crime, if a person is standing there, rather than looking at the evidence as it's brought forth, they will excuse you. They will dismiss you. And is Trump, based on this, is Trump getting a fair trial? Right? No, it's a show trial. Right? This is political charade. All right, let's go. Actually, do one more question, then I'll go a bit deeper into some of the stories for the night. It's from Christine from Kansas. He said, why has no one been held accountable for Crossfire Hurricane or Obamagate? These are egregious crimes. What is wrong with the government? Well, I think we might have the answer to that in the next story, which is we're going to be talking about how the DOJ slow-walked Trump's executive orders while fast-tracking Biden's. But we'll have to see what happens. Navarro is alleging that Barr himself may have been on the side of Biden during Trump's last days in office, Barr being former head of the Department of Justice. And maybe that's partly why. But at the same time, we do have a special counsel in place, Durham. I know people don't like Durham. I mean, Durham hasn't done anything. He was supposed to make this report on Crossfire Hurricane and release it. We never saw the report. We never saw charges. Really, this should have been done before Trump left office. And actually, this should have been done before the elections, because a lot of people's interpretations of Trump were shaped on the Crossfire Hurricane Trump-Russia scandal. And had they been presented with actual evidence showing how a lot of the information was not only false, but how there was massive corruption within our government that allowed that to happen in the first place, maybe people would have voted differently. And maybe that's why they never released it, right? Political bias, essentially shaping essentially shaping the laws of our country. The laws are being led not by law, but by political interest, is what seems to be the case. And on that, let's go into the story, actually, because this fits right into it. This is Epoch Times. It says Navarro, again, former top Trump advisor. DOJ slow walked Trump's executive orders while fast-tracking Biden's. It says the Department of Justice put up hurdles to executive orders prepared by President Donald Trump while fast-tracking the ones prepared by President-elect Joe Biden during the transition period. During the transition leading up to the inauguration on January 20th, according to former Trump senior advisor Peter Navarro. And what does this mean, right? It means this was during the transition. This was when Biden wasn't even president of the United States, which means this is when Trump was still president. And the Department of Justice was acting on behalf of Biden and against Trump while Trump was still president. What does this say, right? Now, this is according to Navarro here. He told Fox News, quote, Bill Barr, President Trump's attorney general, actually turns out to be Joe Biden's first attorney general. We had over 30 executive orders queued after Election Day, ready to go. But we kept running into all these roadblocks and hurdles. It turns out that Bill Barr's office of legal counsel was fast-tracking all of these Biden EOs, executive orders. And basically, it was a deep state coup. He's calling this a coup involving Barr, involving Biden. Now, I can't give criminal accusation on that. This is according to Navarro. Take it for what it's worth. But it did seem to be the case that we saw circumstantial evidence based on what we saw at the surface that this is very likely the case. Now, Navarro made the remarks when asked to explain how Biden managed to have dozens of executive actions ready to go during his first days in office, right? What is he at now? Over 40 executive orders, I think 39 within the first week. Ironically, because Biden himself was saying that dictators govern through executive action, suggesting that he wouldn't do it. But maybe he's saying something about himself right now. I don't know. Right? Now, Navarro said he's worked on preparing more than 50 executive orders during his 4 years at the White House under Trump. The DOJ's Office of Legal Counsel serves as the final checkbox in the process of determining whether the president has the statutory authority to set in motion what the contents of a given order call for, meaning that all those executive orders Biden was signing one after the next within his first week in office, all of those would have had to have been pre-approved through a whole process, including Barr in the Department of Justice. Now, in a phone call with the Epoch Times, Barr commented on this. So Barr did refute this. Barr said Navarro's remarks are, quote, preposterous. Navarro alleged as well, he said, we got slow walked at the Department of Justice, and this is a problem I told Barr about numerous times. And he should have been fired months before he was. By the last year of his administration, he was really working against the administration in a lot of ways. And he continued, the bottleneck was at the Department of Justice on so many things we did. So he's alleging that Barr stopped a lot of Trump's actions, even going back this past year. And again, Barr is saying that these comments are preposterous. He does not agree with them, right? He doesn't agree with Navarro on this. Now, Barr announced his resignation as Attorney General on December 14, 2020, and he left office on December 23rd. At the time, Trump's legal team was pursuing numerous challenges to the outcome of the 2020 election. In the letter, Barr lauded Trump's accomplishments and noted the Department of Justice would continue to pursue investigations into alleged voter fraud. On January 7th, the day after the breach of the U.S. Capitol, Barr issued a scathing statement criticizing Trump, the president. Now, Barr said in the statement that was obtained by Politico, quote, orchestrating a mob to pressure Congress is inexcusable. The president's conduct yesterday was a betrayal of his office and supporters, meaning Barr, at the very end of it, did turn on Trump. Now, did that happen before all this? Is Navarro's assessment accurate? Barr says it's preposterous, but based on the standards of approval you would need for executive orders and based on how many executive orders Biden had ready to go right after coming into office, well, it seems that there's some credence to his statements. Now, I won't go too deep into the impeachment stuff again because I think we already covered it, but let's jump into some other stories because there's a lot I wanted to talk about tonight still. The drink tonight is good old-fashioned black tea. I'm going for the cheap stuff tonight. But yeah. Anyways, all right. Yeah, wild times we're living in, folks. All right. So a bit on big tech right now. I want to go into a bit with big tech. And all right, so this is the first one up, talking about Facebook. Now, one of you mentioned earlier that there's already been a lot of deaths with the vaccines, and really nobody talks about this. Well, as I mentioned, if you post this on Facebook now, Facebook itself may actually delete or remove your posts. Now, this is Epoch Times again. It says Facebook will take down posts with claims about vaccines that it deems false. Now, Facebook announced on February 8th that it will take down posts with claims about vaccines that health organizations or its fact checkers deem false. And frankly, I've personally seen how their fact checkers work, because they fact checked, both of my documentaries. And ironically, a lot of what I talked about in the first one, pretty much a lot of the stuff they fact checked has been proven by this point. All right, let's go into this now. This is a post from Facebook. They said, quote, "Today we are expanding our efforts to remove false claims on Facebook and Instagram about COVID-19 vaccines, and vaccines in general during the pandemic." And they say, since December, we've removed false claims about COVID-19 vaccines that have been debunked by public health experts. We've seen about how accurate their debunking tends to be, right? Like hydroxychloroquine. How many of you remember when they were criticizing Trump's comments on, hey, hydroxychloroquine might work, saying that it's not proven, not backed by health experts? And frankly, if I had posted videos about hydroxychloroquine, YouTube was threatening to delete videos that talked about medical advice that they didn't agree with. Now it turns out, hey, maybe hydroxychloroquine does work. Hey, look, it's somewhat approved now. Hey, maybe had we had this in place earlier, less people would have died. Really, this is the issue you have, is it's the question of whether you and I as individuals are capable of looking at information presented to us and drawing our own assessments on whether we want to risk our health to try it. What happens then if the only medical discussions we can have are the ones agreed upon by the experts? The experts, right? And I would say that there are different classes of experts. There were plenty of experts, right? Credible experts who said hydroxychloroquine works. There were plenty of experts who pointed to possible treatments for COVID-19. But all of that was being suppressed. All of that was being put down. And all of that, a lot of it now, is coming out, and some of it's turning out to have been true. In other words, the medical assessment and official community is one particular community among many different professionals. And really, you and I should be the ones to assess, in my opinion, which experts we believe, right? Because we've seen that the experts have gotten things wrong quite a bit. We've seen that the experts were the ones that criticized Trump for closing down travel with China. We saw the experts were the ones who told us there was no human-to-human transmission. We saw the experts were the ones who argued that, again, that lockdowns work, when really we're seeing the opposite in places like Florida. The experts have gotten a lot of things false. The approved experts have gotten a lot of things false. And frankly, the experts that have been written off have gotten a lot of things right. It just takes time sometimes. The issue is that you are not allowed right now to assess which expert you choose to believe, because these platforms have decided to be the gatekeepers of your medical information. They're the gatekeepers of the information that can inform your health decisions, which is bizarre, right? What happened to my body, my choice, right? Shouldn't you be allowed to make your own assessments for your own health? Well, this is the decline you often see with policy, that it starts in one place. The first step in taking away your individual rights is taking away your right to be exposed to information and to state your opinion. Once you're no longer to state a certain opinion on something or make your own assessment based on something, and you have to put your faith wholly in what is government approved, well, pretty soon the only option you're allowed to have is the option that is government approved. And frankly, this is the slow march towards the same types of policies we see in places like the UK, where they have socialized medicine, and where if, for example, there's a treatment that may actually save your life, but it's not fully approved, you're not allowed to try it. And what do they tell you? They say, well, sorry, sir, time to die with dignity. They've actually told this to people. Time to die, time to die with dignity. Yes, there's this possible treatment, but we can't put you at risk, even though you're on your deathbed and you're dying. Sorry, sir, for the empire. Yeah, and that's it, right? This is the direction we're heading right now with these technocrats, with these big businesses, and that's exactly what they are, ironically, because typically the people who oppose typically capitalism tend to be against big business capitalism, and these are technocrat capitalists trying to enforce socialist policies. What a wild world we're in. But they're telling us right now that you are not allowed to make your own health assessments. You're not allowed to even look at information that they deem is not good for you. That this is where it's at with Facebook right now. Now, in my opinion, things like this can only happen if they're not challenged. Things like this can only happen if they're not criticized. And frankly, I think if people speak out about it, maybe it won't happen. So, if you think something's wrong, say something, honestly. Next story here. This is Twitter now. All right, this is quite the story. Twitter is considering subscription fees as a way to diversify revenue. Now, what happened with Twitter? They banned Trump, who actually had a pretty big following on Twitter. We could argue a lot of the daily Twitter discussions were on Trump's comments. They banned Trump. A lot of people were unhappy with this. Then they banned a whole lot of Trump supporters. And then they start threatening to help investigate people with this whole Capitol breach thing. Any statement you've made on Twitter or any other social media now is evidence that can be used against you in a court of law if deemed necessary by these tech oligarchs. Now, Twitter's solution to this, Twitter's immediate repercussions of this were a huge hit to their market. And how are they dealing with this huge hit to their market? The time it waits to diversify revenue, and they're considering subscription fees. How many of you who are considering leaving Twitter are like, oh, great, let me go pay them a subscription fee now to use their incredibly open service? All right, let me go into this. Twitter is considering adding subscription fees as the company looks to diversify its income streams, according to a company official. And Bruce Falk, revenue product lead at Twitter, said in a statement that was emailed to the Epoch Times, so we did confirm it, said, quote, increasing revenue durability. Durability. You got to love corporate speak. Increasing revenue durability is our top company objective. What does that mean? It means making sure that we don't go bankrupt is a big focus right now. Right? Increasing the durability, right? The strength of our revenue, because they're losing a lot of money right now, is a top company objective. In other words, their number one priority is making sure they don't lose more money. Now they continue. He continues. He says, these may help subscriptions and other approaches that give people and businesses of all sizes on Twitter access to unique features and enhanced opportunities for content creation, discovery, and engagement. Like, maybe deleting your entire media page in one day, like they did to, Gateway Pundit, for example, or, deleting your 8-10 years of work building a following because you might say something they disagree with one day and say you violated the terms of service. What kind of business at this point would say it's a worthwhile investment to even invest the time to build up these platforms when they can, as they've demonstrated, delete them on a whim? A political biased whim, as we've seen, for example, with what they've done with these media. Again, really CNN spreading false news about the killing of this officer on January 6th, saying that the officer who was killed during the Capitol breach was beaten to death by Trump supporters with a fire extinguisher. That now there's no evidence showing that. That seems to be false. CNN has retracted their statement on it, and now appears that he died from inhaling the gas they were using on the protesters, meaning that false news, fake news spread by CNN in this case, may have caused a whole lot of social problems. Are they going to be punished by these social media platforms now for spreading fake news? Probably not. Meanwhile, again, websites like Gateway Pundit post evidence, video surveillance evidence they received of, vote night, shady vans rolling up, and they get their entire media deleted. It's quite the bizarre situation we're seeing with these platforms right now. But on this, we're actually seeing some new developments as well. This is an interesting story here. Yeah, the interesting story here. Real quick, hey, Josephine. Yeah, thank you. So you're saying thank you. Yeah, thank you all. Some of you mentioning you're subscribing to the Epoch Times. Really appreciate it. Actually, one of the great ways to support Crossroads, just subscribe to the Epoch Times. That is a stable, uncensorable revenue stream for us. This is, of course, a channel of the Epoch Times, and really, Epoch Times is financed by its readers, and that is the most stable way for us to keep doing what we're doing, as if you subscribe. So we do appreciate it. All right, this next story here. This says Florida anti-censorship proposal tries to sidestep Section 230 protections. And this is the ongoing trajectory, I would say, that I've been saying we're going to see with different states, is that as the federal government, really ironically working together with the other institutions of government, let me step back. The way the American system is established is that you have different branches of government, 3 branches of government: the executive branch, the president; the legislative branch, House and Senate; and the judiciary, right, the Supreme Court and the courts, which keep each other in check. They're supposed to keep each other in check. Right now, there's a supermajority. Democrats control, at the very least, the executive branch and the legislative branch, and arguably the judiciary, the judicial branch, because it's not really clear how the Supreme Court is going to be voting right now, right? They have a supermajority. They control everything, meaning there's no checks and balances. And these are among people who've demonstrated that they tend to do things in lockstep, regardless of evidence, regardless of what's really in front of them. It's all political interest, right? They'll march in lockstep based on party interest. As we're seeing now with the impeachment attempt to impeach President Trump, right? Or former President Trump. He's a private citizen. They don't care what the evidence is. And normally, this is why you have checks and balances. This is why you have different branches of government, to keep things like this from happening. And now we have also the fourth estate, quote unquote, which is the media. Not an official estate, but the fourth estate, the media, which also typically holds government in check because it is the voice of the people. It is the mind of the people, right? It gets information from the average citizen, brings them into one place, and shows government exactly what the people are saying. And right now we have it so big business controls most of the media in this country. I mean, we do see a resurgent, I think, a big growth in independent media, like you're watching right now. But they're doing everything they can to suppress that as well. And this ties into as well the problem that the big media is controlled by the big corporations, right? 6 corporations control just about every mainstream news outlet, right, left, and center. Right? They control every voice along the spectrum of voices to an extent. And the same parent companies as these are the ones trying to censor their competitors right now. And so what happens when business, media, all 3 branches of government are marching in lockstep with each other? Well, that's a tyranny. That is tyranny. And what I've been saying is going to happen is, as this takes place, very likely what we're going to see is individual states standing up, including with their state legislatures, including with their local mayors and governors, including even with individual lawsuits filed in local courts. We're going to see states standing up and arguing that they represent the rights of the citizens of their states and they don't support what's happening. Or they're going to start calling into question, again, the boundaries of the federal government, as we're seeing on the extreme right now with Texas trying to leave the union. And as we're seeing a lot right now with Florida. And we're seeing now not just actions against big government, we're seeing now actions against big business. And this is this Florida one here. Now, it says here, this is Epoch Times, Florida anti-censorship proposal tries to sidestep Section 230 protections. And again, Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act is what gives social media websites essentially legal immunity because they argue that they aren't able to censor their platforms. They aren't able to moderate. That's the argument for it. And so they can't be held legally liable for content on their platforms. They are legally protected because of that. Now it says here, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is taking a stand against social media censorship with a proposed bill that would allow fining and suing tech platforms for certain content policing decisions. In other words, certain types of actions of these media companies where they decide to censor you, you can sue them if this bill passes. Now, companies such as YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter enjoy broad liability protection under the Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act of 1996. The proposal, however, appears to attempt to sidestep these protections, right? This local proposal looks to sidestep Section 230 by asking for more transparency, tying anti-censorship measures to state election regulations, and giving users more control over content policing. I won't go too much deeper into that because we talked about this a bit in the past. But again, what you're seeing now is a bill arguing that there should be some exceptions to those protections that these companies enjoy. And there's more on this as well now, right? Let me show you the next one here. Texas is doing the same thing. And again, the trajectory I've been saying we're going to watch happen, right? Local states, individual states taking their own stand, saying we have rights too. We have state rights. We have a say over what happens to our citizens. Actually, technically, states can legislate. They can pass laws that can be different from the federal government. For example, the federal government can say marijuana is illegal, and a state could say it is illegal. Or the federal government can say marijuana is legal, right? They can legalize it. But if a state says, no, it's illegal in our state, it's illegal in that state. We have two sets of laws in America. There's state law and there's federal law, right? This is why, again, federal crimes are typically much worse. But states can also have their own laws as well. States can enact their own laws, and states can challenge the jurisdiction of the federal government to an extent as well, right? You have state rights in America. And we're seeing now this big argument of states arguing, right? Arguing the boundaries of the federal government, where the powers of the federal government end and where the powers of the state should begin. And we see them now pushing back very hard against what we're seeing happening, not just in the government, but as well with big business. And again, Texas is now getting behind Florida. And this is interesting for a few reasons. It's interesting, first of all, right? Interesting, first of all, that Florida is doing this. Interesting, second of all, that Texas is following in the footsteps of Florida. But even more interesting is that now you have states aligning with each other. You have states cooperating with each other on this pushback. And what happens when you have states working together? You start to form alliances. Now let's go into this a bit. It says Texas Governor Greg Abbott said on Sunday yesterday that he was working on a bill with legislatures in his state to prevent big tech companies taking action to moderate user content based on their political viewpoint. And he said this in a statement on Twitter. He said, "We are working with Senator Brian Hughes on legislation to prevent social media providers like Facebook and Twitter from canceling conservative speech." His announcement follows again Florida's move to pass this similar legislation that would penalize social media companies that deplatform candidates during an election. That proposed law would fine companies $100,000 a day until the candidate's access to the platform is restored. Now, as I mentioned before, it's not just limited to candidates, and really $100,000 a day, if these companies are acting based on political interest, might not hit them too hard. Facebook, probably not, and YouTube especially not. Twitter, maybe. But this is the beginning of something, right? This is the beginning of states starting to stand up individually where the federal government is not. All right, folks, let me go over a few questions. This is from, let's see, this is from Beth Coddington. He said, "We are lucky here in Iowa as well. Governor Reynolds is keeping the state open. No worse off than states with the shutdowns." Yeah, and actually, in a normal situation, there would be a medical assessment, right? Normal situation, there'd be a medical assessment. And there'd be an assessment in different states looking at the state of the economy, looking at the impact of the lockdowns, and looking at the states that didn't have lockdowns and saying, is it viable? Is it worth the damage to maintain these lockdowns? We're seeing now that states, actually, there have even been articles on it. We're seeing now that states and even countries that have lockdowns aren't necessarily doing any better than states without lockdowns. Actually, we're seeing the opposite, that states with more regulations have actually been worse off with the virus. There's been a lot of stories on this, actually. It's not absolute, though. We do see, for example, some countries being a little worse off. We see the opposite as well. For example, Taiwan kept things almost totally open, and really they did very well with the virus. It wasn't really that bad at all compared to other places. So normally you would have governors and mayors look at the actual impact of their policies and look at the policies of their neighboring governors and mayors and assess based on that what is the best choice for their citizens. Why are they not making assessments on what is the best choice for their citizens? And instead they're maintaining policies regardless of what the evidence is showing. I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine. Maybe it's political interest. Maybe there's something deeper to it. Who knows? This is from Edward Howley. You said, but who owns big media? Who owns those big 6 corporations? Yeah, boards of directors, big investors. I mean, you could go into it for quite some time to say who owns these mega corporations, which is what they are. Yeah. And then, the big thing is too, the real complicated picture when you start getting into these big businesses that pull the strings on government policy with foreign investment, with the media, is you have to look at the main investors, the stakeholders, and then you look at their own personal financial interest and personal investments. I guarantee you start looking at some of these individuals, you're going to see a whole lot of personal interest with Chinese investment. You're going to see a whole lot of ties in very illicit ways with foreign governments. Actually, a lot of these big companies, they're not even American companies. They're multinational companies. And, one of the big ironies that I've stated before, which I think for a lot of socialists goes right over their heads, is a lot of these companies advocate for socialism. And why is that? It's because socialism doesn't get rid of big business. All socialism does is subsidizes this. It takes them and puts them under full or partial state ownership. And so your tax money subsidizes them so they don't have to worry about failure anymore. It gives them, right? It gives them what in China they would call an iron rice bowl, where they essentially become government officials with say powers that can never be stripped from them. Of course they want socialism because this is ensuring that they never fail. It's ensuring that your tax money subsidizes their comfy lifestyle. That's all it does. Can we name a single socialist or communist country that has gotten rid of big business? No, they take over the big business. They take over the factories. The only difference, again, with a capitalist market is that you have small and medium-sized businesses that folks like you and I could start up. And you have checks and balances in place oftentimes to make sure that these big corporations aren't able to have unequal competitive advantages over the small guys. I think there's a lot of misinterpretations around this stuff. Look at how a lot of these big businesses align themselves politically. Why are they all aligning themselves behind, again, big government? Why do they align themselves behind socialist policies? We mentioned before, right, the technocracy. I had you might watch the interview I did on it. A really great expert on this. Watch the interview I did about technocracy. Right, there is socialism enforced through big business, technocracy. There's also socialism enforced through the unions, syndicalism. There's also socialism enforced through the union of government and corporations, which was Nazism and fascism. It's bizarre these things. And for some reason, modern social democrats, even, they don't seem to recognize the nature and structure of systems. They understand these things purely on emotion and purely on sharing and fighting against the oligarchs, without realizing that these things subsidize the oligarchs. Typically, socialism leads to oligarchy. It is the system of oligarchy. Look at how they always end up: late stage socialism or post communism, like Russia, where after the system does collapse, the only people with money to buy the resources are the people who are in charge, right? Then you have an unconquerable oligarchy running the entire system for, as long as, maybe forever. Who knows if it ever is going to change? And somehow they believe it's going to do the opposite. It's really bizarre, actually. But this is also where America is teetering right now. This is the wall on which we are teetering. We can go either way depending on how things play out. All right, let's see here. This is from Noctim K. Knight. You said, Josh, how can we keep any hope of justice when FBI agents factory reset phones that are subject to search warrants without consequence, and it appears that the law does not apply to one side at all? Yeah, well, and the irony is that even if they use this software to delete data on phones, even if you factory reset your phones, that data is oftentimes still recoverable to an extent. I could recover deleted data if I wanted to. There's free software you can use to do it. You can even go to data recovery centers to recover deleted data, including from some degrees of formatting. And so, yes, the fact that FBI, when it's in their interest, data has been deleted. Oh, okay, no further investigations here, folks. That's the end of it. Yeah, there is political bias with that, I believe. At the very least, we could say there's evidence of bias and evidence of not wanting to pursue something beyond a certain threshold of difficulty, right? But I've said before Biden, right, before the inauguration and everything, that really, the state this country's in, a lot of people are losing faith in the institutions. They're losing faith in the integrity of our legal system, of our government, of even the economy. I'd say left and right. I'd say Democrats with the BLM movement have lost faith to some extent in the law enforcement of this country. And conservatives are losing faith in the integrity of our courts and federal law enforcement. This is a very dangerous place for the country to be in. And really, if this country is going to be fixed, people need to see evidence that law goes both ways, that Lady Justice is still blind, right? Lady Justice wears her blindfold and holds her scales and holds her sword. She is fair. She is, you have equal representation under the law. And she's willing to carry out justice regardless of where you stand on the political spectrum, where you stand financially. You could be the president of the United States and you could face charges. You could be a homeless guy in New York. You could face charges, top to bottom. And if you're a government official, if you are, worked in the government, yes, it should apply equally to you. Now, the problem we have in this country is that law is being interpreted as politically biased. And they're enforcing things on one side, namely against Republicans, very rapidly, as we're seeing right now with the Department of Justice, as we went over tonight. And they're pretty much doing nothing against the other side. Right? What happened to Crossfire Hurricane? What happened to Obamagate? What happened to all these things, right? They're gone, right? At the very least, maybe Durham's doing something. At the very least, we're not hearing anything about them. I think this is a dangerous situation for the country to be in. And I really think that if people in our government want to really have a time for healing, as they're saying, time to heal, right? They need to reestablish this, right? They need to put the blindfold back on Lady Justice and demonstrate again that Lady Justice doesn't look at your skin color. Lady Justice doesn't look at your political, voting record. Lady Justice doesn't look at your standing politically or economically. That if you violate the law, you are held to the same laws as every other person in the country. Until that happens, I think that we are going to be in a dangerous situation. when it comes to people recognizing even the authority and integrity of the system we have. And it's not, and I'm not saying this is a good thing. I think it's a terrible thing. It's a terrible thing even from the standpoint of what I've been talking about a lot about subversion, Soviet era ideological subversion, or even Chinese Communist Party subversion. If you go back and watch Yuri Bezmenov, great videos if you haven't watched them, highly recommend it, Yuri Bezmenov. He also wrote a book under the name Thomas Schulman called Love Letter to America. Highly, highly recommend it. Can't recommend it enough. He talks about the 5 stages of subversion that communist states would basically run to take over a country, and noted that they were doing this very heavily against the United States. Part of that is demoralization and destabilization. You want to destroy the integrity of the systems that make a country work. And if you can't destroy them, destroy the perception of the integrity of the systems. A state of this country where people no longer have faith in the integrity of our systems is a dangerous state, not just from the standpoint of social stability, but from the standpoint of communist takeover, right? Because if people believe that the system is no longer working and they think it's broken, they want a new system, or they want order to be restored. And the risk is that when people want order restored, sometimes they'll accept things they shouldn't be accepting. Sometimes they'll accept very extreme forms of government because that very extreme form of government is promising the order that they crave. This is why you had communists roll in under the guise of opposing corruption. This is why you had Hitler roll in, after the, Weimar Republic and the perception of corruption. Well, there was corruption and moral corruption at that time, is because the situation was so bad that people would take any cure offered to them. It's what happened in China with Mao Zedong when they were in a state of anarchy for a while, and really people would accept any cure, right? People would accept any cure offered to them. They didn't know what they were getting themselves into. It's not a good state, right? It's not a good state to have a system that we don't have faith in. I'm not saying you should have faith into this point, honestly, though, either, because we haven't really seen them demonstrate integrity. My hope is that this integrity is restored, but we'll see if that happens. All right, folks. I'm going to call it a night here. Always a real pleasure talking with you all. I always enjoy doing these lives also. Now, again, tomorrow is going to be the first day of the impeachment. Tune in tomorrow, 10:30 p.m. Eastern time. I'll be covering that, of course, as well as whatever else happens tomorrow. So we'll see. Now, as always, folks, again, genuinely really appreciate you all. I always enjoy talking with you. Enjoy the conversations as well. Yeah, Crazy Mort, good night also. Yeah, thanks, everyone. I mentioned before, we are totally demonetized by YouTube. We'll have to see what happens with them maybe restoring our monetization and our super chats. In the meantime, we're looking for other options, but in the meantime, we are hoping to stay on YouTube. And so we do appreciate if you like and subscribe. It does help us. And folks, with that said, as always, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. This has been quite the week, not just for our nation, but for the show as well. Now, as I mentioned in a recent episode, we found out the same day as the inauguration that YouTube has completely demonetized us. Now, honestly, it was expected, given the current environment of censorship, but it's also quite the blow to us financially, at least for the time being. It's a difficult time for not just us, but for the nation as a whole. In Washington, 6 in the morning, the sky was still dark. News reports said that the National Guard would be leaving, but even by noon, we still saw them stationed on the streets. And I wondered whether this really will be the new norm for the United States, and whether the nation has reached a stage where every national event going forward will have security like this. Now, it's not just the past few days that have been hard for the country, but the last year especially. We've seen panic around the CCP virus, job losses, an economic nosedive that hit small businesses the hardest. And on top of this, we've seen riots sweep across the country that pitted citizens against the police. We've witnessed a political climate where the people of this country are being held to two different sets of laws, and we saw a difficult election where many serious questions were left unanswered. People are losing faith in the integrity of our systems of justice, in our systems of government, and even in our fellow countrymen. Now, I was reflecting on all this as I walked through Washington. It's been hard for me to watch this country, which I love so much, facing so much turmoil and division. And it's difficult to watch our rights of freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, and freedom of belief being targeted for attacks. It's hard to watch big businesses and the big corporate media working hand in hand with big government in these attacks. Now, it was while I was thinking about this that a man recognized me on the streets. He greeted me and thanked me for doing the show. I've always enjoyed meeting you all, but it was especially so this time. It reminded me how important independent media is during chaotic times like these. Now, I've always held that truth has the natural power to dispel lies, so it's natural that those who lie have it in their interest to prevent truth from being spoken. It takes courage in times like these to stand up, as it takes a willingness to face criticism and attacks. But I also understand that taking up this mantle during this time is what myself and others are being asked to do, and I'll do everything I can to not let you down, and to do so calmly and with good reason. Now, I'm a big believer in finding opportunities in adversity. When one door closes, another opens, and I have faith that for those who stand with integrity, goodness will always prevail. The Epoch Times has been publishing for over 20 years, despite the Chinese Communist Party's best efforts to shut us down. They've gone after our funding sources, they've hacked our website, they've set our printers on fire, they've threatened our staff, and used every means they could to discredit us. And despite the world's second largest economy bearing down on us, we've never stopped publishing, and we never plan to do so. Now, you may be wondering how we've managed to survive all these years. Now, put simply, we've managed to survive because of you, because of loyal viewers and readers who support independent media. So thank you, genuinely. We couldn't have done it without you. And with that said, given that YouTube has demonetized us, if you want to support us, please consider donating to us on DonorBox, which you can find linked in the description below. And going forward, I plan to continue presenting an accurate picture of the news, including here in the United States. I also plan to continue my work exposing the subversive programs of the Chinese Communist Party, which I think will only become more serious. And I plan also to help expose the forms that socialism is now taking in this country and around the world, while also helping to keep alive the values and traditions that are now under assault. That said, folks, thank you all for being here, and thank you for your support. And while it's possible we may move to another platform, these current attacks will not stop us from speaking the truth. And as always, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.